Okay, good morning, everybody. This is Anthony Sanchez from Customers First Now, and thank you for joining us today on our CX Leader webinar this month. Today, we have a great presentation. We have Carrie Nelson here. She's our CEO here at Customers First Now, and she will be introducing our special guest today, who will be discussing with her the employee journey and what they learned about employee experience and customer experience in the process. But before I get started, just want to let you know that we do appreciate your questions, and so all you need to do to ask a question is type it into the questions panel on your control panel for GoToWebinar, and we'll get them all at the end of the slide presentation. Carrie, we think we're going to start off with your introduction, so here we go.
Thanks, Anthony, and hi, everyone. Hope everyone's having a great week so far, and thanks for joining us. So today, our guest is Mazhar Ahmad from Ortho Clinical Diagnostics. And Mazhar, I've known Mazhar a long time. I'm really excited for this. Mazhar and I worked together at Dun & Bradstreet years ago. Great HR partner, but more importantly, Mazhar and the team he works with at Ortho really have taken their role and really made it central to what Ortho's done from a customer excellence perspective. And I think that their story is really relevant to so many of you. As I talk with all of you and talked with our customers, the employee is central to driving your CX efforts. So really today, what we're going to do is we're going to really show you some ways that you can connect your employees to your CX initiatives in your program in a way that really makes them feel part of it, but also it really helps your employee engagement along the way. And so, what we're going to do today is really understand, the key things are understanding your employee's journey from their point of view. That's a really key one. So if you think about some of these things, exactly what you do with your customers. Do you really understand your employee's journey from start to finish when they join you, when they leave you? Do you understand all those points? And Mazhar's going to really talk about their experience, which was a great one. It's identifying the gaps in the current state, what's not working today, what is working, what's really important to your employees, and then how do you deliver those higher employee retention rates, productivity, and engagement scores. So those are really the outcomes from, really focusing on that employee engagement, which does, we know, correlate to improving your customers' delight, your customer satisfaction. And then finally, all of this really gets back to linking your values of your company, the brand, and really making that come to life through your employee experience. So there is a lot of goodness that can happen by doing this and doing it in a really thoughtful manner. So that's what we're going to talk about today. One of the things we just pulled up, because, you see these all over the internet and by different companies of, how the employee experience is really key. But, these are good facts to remind us is, a couple of these I just will point out, engaged employees are 87% less likely to leave. So when you look at this, you attract better people when you have a great reputation about how you treat your employees, how you treat your customers. I think the thing I've always learned is, when we show up at work, we are who we are in and outside of work. And it's the same thing with companies. Your employees reflect who you are to your customers. So how we treat each other in a company is usually very similar to how we're treating our customers. So it is really key, and all these stats point to that. If we go to the next slide, I like this chart because one of the things, that this really connects is that when you ask your employees about how happy they are with their current job. That's really, you look at the smiley faces and the sad faces at the bottom of the chart. That's, I'm happy with my current job. And those that agree are willing to work harder for their companies. That's what this says. So again, when you're trying to drive better productivity, better engagement, better retention, people being really satisfied with their current job is really key for them wanting to work harder. And a lot of that satisfaction comes from their connection to the customers and why your customer, why your company actually exists. So what we're going to talk about today, and I'm just going to kind of give you a framework and then have Mazzer talk a little bit about the ortho story, is, there are ways to document your employee experience, and the way to capture their feedback. So again, very similar to when we think about your customer experience. We do customer journey maps, we collect customer survey feedback, we identify pain points, we have customer personas. It's exactly what you want to do with your internal employee base. You want to understand their end-to-end experience, and I'm going to show you an example of what that journey can look like and what you should be documenting. And with that, you want to really understand their feedback from your employee surveys. Again, just like your customer, what are your employees, what's working, what's not working, and how does that link back to their experience? So all of this should really come together to really give you a good understanding of where in the journey do you need to spend, your resources and your efforts. So if we look at this slide, so what you're seeing here is what we call a journey spine. And the journey spine is really the end-to-end key categories of an employee's journey with, any company. These are pretty standard. So they become aware of you. So in the blue boxes in the center, they become aware. They then become interested. They apply. There's onboarding. There's early development. There's things that you do to support them in their job, kind of business as usual. Reward and recognition, career development, and they leave or they might return. And so these are the things that then in the gray boxes, we're just kind of explaining, what do you really want to understand in each of these parts of the journey? And this is really key. It's the key takeaways here is that, one, you really want an end-to-end understanding. You don't want to just go in the middle of it and say, okay, they're already hired, now what's happening? There are things that happen when you set expectations about who you are when you hire them, that then either make them feel really great because you met their expectations, or they're really let down because once they've started with you, then they're suddenly like, well, this isn't what you told me it was going to be like to work here. So you really want that end-to-end. And the other thing is, on the end of the journey, when people will leave, and those people that leave, how you treat them when they leave, is really important, because you may want some of these people back someday, or you want them to refer others to your company. So it really is important to look at the end-to-end. So here is really a standard approach that we have for journey mapping for your employees. And this is what Mazzer and his team went through, where we look at, the process of, really defining the scope of the project. Are we going to look at all employees? Are we going to look at a certain geography? Are we going to look at a certain product area? So those are all good answers. You can start anywhere. I think, what you'll hear from Mazzer, they really started at at all employees and really globally, because they are a global company and really wanted to understand the nuances and the cultural differences along the way. And then really, so once you have your scope defined, it's really then making sure that, there's a real clear understanding of the business, like what are we trying to actually achieve? And again, as we look at the ortho example, one of the first things we did is we looked at the HR goals, the company goals, and looked at how this particular project can help influence those and impact them. So again, making sure things are very linked and have a good understanding of the outcomes that you're going to deliver. And then as we go through the process, it's really understanding the view of HR, what did they, because they're the closest to some of these key processes that serve the employees, what's their perception of some of the pain points, moments of truth. And then also talking, in step 5, talking to the actual employees and doing focus groups, which is the most fun activity you can do is really getting deep with them and then sharing the insights. So now I'm going to have Mazzer. Mazzer, what I'd love you to do is really, as we start, is really kind of just, tell the story of ortho. And I love this particular slide because it really started with, what were the HR objectives for the company and how this particular approach was going to help. So, Mazzer, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Carrie and team, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here to tell our story. It's one that is very much still a work in progress. So when Carrie reached out to me and said, "Would you mind sharing all the good things you've done?" I said, "Well, we're still in it, right?" So happy to share what we've done up to this point, but it's really an exciting time for us. So before I kind of go into some of the specifics here, I thought it'd be important just to give a little bit of context about who Ortho is and sort of where we are on the corporate journey, because I think it helps to inform why we've made the decisions we've made up to this point to invest in this work. So as context, Ortho Clinical Diagnostics used to be a part of J&J. We used to be a division of Johnson & Johnson. And about 4 years ago, we were spun out and essentially went private. We went to the Carlyle Group, who's our private equity partner. And as you can imagine, getting spun out of Johnson & Johnson, being a 75-year-old company, there was a lot of transition that had to happen, right? So basically, becoming independent required us to create new systems, to create new processes. And we were really calling ourselves a 75-year-old startup in many ways because J&J only allowed us to take so many of their things, and we were creating new things as we went. So the first 3 or 4 years were really about getting our house in order and getting strong and stable to transition a global company about a couple billion in revenue with close to 5,000 employees worldwide is no small undertaking. But I give all the credit in the world to our executive leadership team, in particular to Martin Medeiros, our chairman and CEO, who about a year and a half, 2 years ago, as the transition was becoming complete and as we were becoming an independent standalone company, had the foresight to say, what's next, right? What is it that's going to continue to differentiate Ortho in the marketplace? And we had a legacy of really being excellent in terms of servicing our customers and differentiating that way, but we kind of lost our way a little bit. And Martin said, we have to get back to understanding and providing our customers with the highest level of excellence that we can provide. So this journey around customer excellence really started to unfold based on his vision for the future. And it wasn't just a vision, it wasn't just talk. We moved into action. He actually assigned one of our senior leaders to take on the role of Chief Customer Officer, Zach Ballard, who really kind of came in and hit the ground running to kind of mobilize the organization to say, this focus on customer excellence has to be something the entire organization rallies around and starts to move forward. And it really has been in a very short amount of time. We've only been at it for about a year and a half now. It really has been inspiring for a lot of people to start to shift the way we're doing things from an organization standpoint. And I always try to anchor this conversation in as important as these things are from an internal process, from an HR process, we always go back to what's the end outcome, right? Particularly when you're in an environment where you're, for those of you who may know, in a private equity environment, or really in any kind of corporate environment, it's all about profitability, it's all about growth, it's all about the bottom line. And so, it's nice to have these initiatives, but unless they're directly connected back to revenue growth or earnings or EBITDA growth, however you're measuring profitability, it just becomes kind of the flavor of the month. So that was really the guiding principle, is whatever we're doing, let's make sure it is driving us towards becoming a stronger company in the marketplace and providing more impact to our customers. So as we dug a little bit deeper, and all the research shows this, and Carrie knows this very well from the work that she's doing, the number one leading indicator to revenue and earnings or EBITDA growth is employee engagement, right? And so when we looked at the research and we looked at the analysis and said, yes, you've got things that are going to take some time to put in place, but we know if you get employee engagement right, the rest will follow. We said it is a no-brainer to really go down this path and really understand our employees, right? So simultaneous to all of this work that we were doing or planning to do from an HR standpoint, our Chief Customer Officer had already started to do work in mapping our customer's journey, right? So the customer journey mapping experience was really a robust process. And really started to tackle a lot of the things that we needed to do internally to align our people and our practices, et cetera. So as that work was taking off in HR, we said, we know that employee engagement is the number one leading indicator to customer excellence. We have to drive this initiative in our organization. And so that's when we engaged with Carrie. She had been working with Zach and his team, so it was a natural fit. We said, let's really get this employee journey mapping process together. And so this slide just gives you a sense of some of the HR objectives that we had going into this experience, and a lot of these things were, as you'll see, validated. Some of the things that we are going to talk about are a little bit new as well. But at the end of the day, it really boiled down to this first point, which is how do we enhance our employees' experience and their engagement, right? Onboarding, recognition, performance management, capabilities, right, talent academies, those are all things that we had already plans to do, and we had developed, and we have a people strategy that is really focused on how do we enable our business for success, how do we create a great place to work, and how do we call what we say is leading the ortho way, right? So essentially building a distinct culture. So all of this work was really kind of geared towards those end objectives. So let me pause there. Carrie, I don't know if you have any questions or thoughts or comments.
Well, I think Mazzer, great background around the company, because I think that is really important. There is always a reason, like, why do this? Why do it now? You know, it's always timing and sequence are so important as to when you choose to do things like this. And I think that what was really smart with what Ortho did is, you know, even after you split from J&J, the first few years were just really about, you know, being a standalone company. So you didn't try to tackle this too soon because, you still had to get the house in order, and then really dived very quickly and very deep into the customer excellence, focus with Zach, with yourself, with Beatrice. So I think the big thing to stress here for everyone is, timing is everything. And you really want to make sure there's a certain level of readiness. Not everyone's going to be ready, but are the key people and influencers ready to go and take the challenge? And I think that's one thing you and the team did very well, is time it. So I would just stress that one. That one's always a tough one for, folks to figure out when is the right time. Because if you don't pick the right time and people aren't ready and there's not the top-down, as you also said, Mazzer with Martin, if there's not the top-down support, then it becomes a check-the-box activity. And it will be just a project and it will not be sustainable. So I think there's some great points you made.
Great. So if we can go to the next slide, this talks a little bit now about how we implemented this approach within HR. So Carrie mentioned Beatrice. Beatrice Lopez Galvez is our Executive Vice President and Chief HR Officer. When we started to have these conversations at the HR leadership team level, this was something that she had always wanted to do, right? It was kind of a dream of hers to really understand our people in a very detailed way. So in addition to Martin and Zach and the executive leadership team, which she's a member of, Beatrice was really instrumental in saying, look, guys, we need to do this to differentiate ourselves from the competition, but more importantly, to really continue to provide our people with just the things that are going to make a difference, right? She's very much about ensuring that when people come to Ortho, they have very meaningful experiences. And ultimately, it's about how do we set that up in a way that allows us to be really targeted and focused because, we can't do everything, right? So we've got to be thoughtful about where we're going to deploy our energy and our resources. So essentially what we did is, in a very short amount of time, because we do have a bias for action here, we don't like to waste time, we galvanized the HR team. We had about 34 people across various HR functions, talent acquisition, total rewards, our HR business partners, all of our centers of excellence, right? We came together and we created and essentially developed the first version of the employee map. We felt like, we had a pretty good idea of what this thing looked like, what our employees' experiences were. Let's get a group of people, again, globally together to have that conversation. And Carrie and her team were there and helped facilitate it. Super, super impactful. Our SHAPE survey is our annual employee engagement survey. So we had a lot of data that we had gotten from a couple months prior. So we also wanted to look at, from a bottoms-up perspective, what our people were saying in terms of areas that were important to them. And then once we had an initial straw man of what this map looked like, we wanted to quickly go out and validate it with our employees. So we, over the course of, I think, 6 weeks, if that, brought together 14 focus groups globally. So we have, operations all over the world, China, ASPAC, LATAM, EMEA, North America, obviously. So this was truly one of these opportunities where it was, let's get all of our key leaders, who are passionate about this on the HR team globally to get out there. I personally went. I was in China, conducted focus groups there, and it was incredible. We talked to over 160 some employees, a ton of comments, a lot of insight into what those moments of truth and pain points were, and essentially brought that feedback back to the core HR team of 34, who then identified, all right, let's look at all this data. What is it telling us? Where are those areas that we really need to focus on to really kind of create this these high impact areas? And if we want to go to the next slide. So what we learned from these discussions and from this analysis was that, the good news is that we actually had a really good reputation and a positive view of our culture. People really felt like this was a place that, cared about its employees, that was moving fast in a very entrepreneurial sense, and was doing things that, from a brand perspective, was very positive in the marketplace. I think, one of the things that we also found, not surprisingly, was that there is a lot of complexity when you're dealing with a global organization, right? So there's consistency in what our employees were experiencing, for example, in our ASPAC region versus China versus other parts of the world. So, the interesting thing is that when we engaged in these dialogues, people were really open and honest. They really wanted to share their thoughts, right? It was one of those things where it's just people, you kind of provide them the forum and they don't hold back, right? And that's great. We want our people to be open and transparent and honest, and, we're big on confronting, the reality and doing something with it. But I think, not surprisingly, one of the other big insights that came out of this is that the interactions people have with their managers, right? We all know that your direct supervisor is the number one reason why you stay or leave a company. Not surprisingly, that came out across in these conversations. Hugely important, right? The engagement that managers had across the entire employee journey, right? From hiring to onboarding to developing to, those performance management conversations, everything was really going back to the manager. And so we started to look at the map and say, what are the themes that were coming out? And as you'll see here in a minute, we really kind of focused in on 3 areas. And those were around onboarding, on feedback and appreciation and recognition, and how people were getting developed from a career standpoint. There's a lot of other areas, but those 3 consistently across the globe came up as the things that we felt would make the biggest impact if we started to put some real concerted effort against. Next slide. So as you can see here, this is the detailed breakdown of the map. Again, there's a lot in here, and I think part of the beauty of this exercise, for those of you who may not be familiar or haven't done it, you get incredibly granular insights, right? So you are forced to literally map out every step of the way, and put yourself in the shoes of your employees. And to me, this is, I think, why Beatrice wanted to do this, right? Because I think we all are employees ourselves, but we make assumptions about what other people in our organization are experiencing. And so by doing this and taking it out of our own minds and really getting our employees to give us that feedback, number one, it validates the things we know, and it tells us some really new things. So again, you can see here lots of things that are good in the green, lots of pain points in yellow, and then those moments of truth and pain points that are flagged in red. Those are the things that we said, okay, this is what's really important to our people, and we need to do a better job. And so again, that's how we kind of honed in on these three areas around onboarding, feedback, and career development.
Yeah, and Mazzer, so if I could just add here, I think that just to make sure, I think you did a great job explaining the map. I just want to add a couple things. So, as Mazzer said, it's a real deep dive. So all those boxes in gray, below the blue line, those are every touch point an employee has with ortho. And again, this isn't meant to be read, so I know it's not easy to see, but this is ortho's map, so intentionally this is not meant to be read. But every single box is a touch point. And what happens through the process that Mazzer just talked about is, in the gray, those are touch points. They happen. There wasn't a lot of feedback about whether those are good or bad. They're neutrals, kind of how you think about it. They're going to happen no matter what. But what you're really trying to understand is, through this process, as Mazzer said, is where are things, irritants. Those are the yellows. And you'll notice we didn't highlight every yellow as a big theme. And the reason we don't highlight the yellows as a big theme is what you're really trying to understand is, yeah, they're irritants, kind of bugs me, but you're trying to really say, this not being right really matters. And it makes me think I maybe should go get another job somewhere else or, change jobs. So you're trying to get to the reds. Where does it really matter to the employee? And it's really irritating. So as the team, and this is a very collaborative process, we had the map on the wall, the HR teams in the room, and really looking at the employee feedback and looking at these areas and saying, here's where we see the highest concentrations of those reds with some of the yellows, which is how they really got to these three critical areas. Again, one of the key challenges companies have is, where do we focus? And, focus isn't 10 things to focus on. That's not focus. It's three. What are the top three? And so, the team did a really great job. And to Mazzer's point, onboarding and career development, probably, where onboarding was already on their radar, career development was on the radar. I think the feedback and appreciation and recognition, as Mazzer said, was one of those things that just, we saw it come through the entire map at, almost every part of their journey of just wanting more. And also, as Mazzer said, from their direct leader, really that personal connection. So that was some really great insight through all those focus groups. So yeah, back to you, Mazzer. I just wanted to add a little bit of, what I saw, which I thought was great.
That's very helpful. So we go to the next slide, please. So again, this is just a view of, HR's perspective versus the employee's perceptions, right? So again, to Carrie's point, I think we had a pretty good sense of where there might be some gaps. And when we looked at what our employees said, I think it was validated, right? And I think in some ways that's a good thing, right? We want our HR people to have the pulse of the employees. It would be concerning if we had a dramatically different. Now, of course, there's things that came up in the employee map that, were additive and were, additionally insightful. But overall, I think it is important because this is also really critical for, those of us who are in HR to test to see, are we doing things that matter, right? I think that's the question that HR organizations are always faced with is, what is the value add that HR provides, right? I think we all get it. We know that we're providing insight, but until we stop and say, what do our employees need, right? They are our customers in many ways. We can oftentimes go down paths that feel good or we think are the right thing or it's kind of the new thing that's out there everybody's focused on, right? But do they really matter? And that's the question we always kept coming back to saying, is the work that we are doing and enabling our business and encouraging our business to focus on, does it matter to our employees? Let's focus on the things that matter. And so that's what this is really all about. All right. So again, as I mentioned, we really try to move quickly on a lot of the work that was done here. So when we came back and identified these three themes around onboarding, feedback, and career development, we said, let's put some plans in place and let's go. Let's get going, right? We got to do something about it, right? And so, again, this is something that we quickly, thought about, from a short-term, long-term, what can we do? But we started work on all of this stuff, right? So from an onboarding standpoint, we put together a team that really started to look at not just, when someone, what's required from a technical standpoint, right? Do I have my laptop? Do I have my, phone? Those little logistical things. We looked at onboarding and said, this is the experience, right? The first 90 days when somebody's here, right? What are the expectations that a manager has to lay out in terms of the job description, the goals, the performance requirements, things of that nature, the onboarding experience, right? So when somebody comes into ortho, whether it's in the U.S. or whether it's in the Czech Republic, they are having a very similar experience, a consistent experience, so that and an excellent experience, right? So people, because you can have a consistently bad experience too, which we obviously do not want. We want consistent excellence, and so that's something that a team is in place and working towards. Same for feedback and appreciation. We started to run some pilot programs around giving and receiving feedback with a number of our key functions. HR was really the first to step into that pilot. I personally led a number of those sessions with other parts of the organization. And again, what we're trying to do is get common language out there. How do we talk about feedback? How do we talk about concepts like the growth and fixed mindset, right? Things that are really important to encourage people not just to give feedback, to each other. How do you give feedback to your managers? How do you give feedback to your teams? How do you essentially create a culture of feedback so that we're not relying on mid-year reviews and end-of-year reviews as the only two times when people get that feedback? And appreciation is a big part of that. How do we recognize people more, right? We've got a lot of incredible recognition programs here at Ortho. We want people to leverage them, right? We want people to take advantage. And then from a career development standpoint, this is a big one, right? How do we equip our managers with the tools, the resources to have those conversations? And then how do we equip our employees with owning their own career development, right? So there are things that, as an organization, yes, we say we want to do, we will do, we are doing, but this is really about empowering our employees and having them understand that as important of a role as their manager is playing, they have just as much of a responsibility to kind of own their own career. So lots of good work happening there as well.
Yeah, and what I would just add, a couple of things in my observations, Mazur, is that what was great was as soon as the mapping project was done and there was alignment on the key areas, it was like immediately into action planning, which I thought was really great that you guys were able to mobilize the team and get it to action, because that was the real purpose. But you've done it faster than I've seen most companies do that. So I love that. And then I also thought what was unique with your situation and how we did the action planning was the lenses that you did place across the three. So there were really these three areas of focus, but then it was like, as you thought about those, there was like, okay, how does the direct manager, play into this? The employee's location, because there were a lot of feedback if you were remote versus not remote. And then communication and ensuring that communication was thought about throughout the process and action planning, which I think was really well done. And then lastly, just how you thought about, doing things that you could do right now versus some of the long term, because that can bog down, the best of companies where you start to say, wow, the biggest thing we need to do is implement some system. Well, that's not going to happen anytime soon. So what can you do immediately? And I thought that was a really great approach as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think the other thing that I would, provide as guidance for people on the call is that, I'm sure many people who are in HR, there's a lot of good stuff that you guys probably already have, right? We had a
Yeah.
lot of really good things already working, right? So it's not like we had to reinvent the wheel, right? We just needed to think about it in a very focused way. And for example, if you want to pop to the next slide, I think this next slide is about some of the work that we've done up to this point in time. Yeah, so we had we had been doing work on onboarding already. It was already on our radar screen, right? We had already worked with some partners externally to get some really good content for giving and receiving feedback. This idea of a Manager 101 curriculum, we already had a lot of the stuff in place, right? We have content around performance management. We have tools around goal setting. We had developed an entire toolkit on my OD side of the house around how do you lead high-performing teams, right? So we had a lot of these resources, but it was just a question of how do we package it up? How do we put it out there, and how do we market it, right? So, one of the things that we talked about as an HR function was if we're asking the business to be more customer-focused, we have to be more customer-focused and act like we are a business line. And in order to do that, we have to understand our customer needs, which is what we're doing now. Our employees are our customers. And then we got to market our services. We got to put our stuff out there. If it's good and we believe in it, people will come and utilize it. So that's really, it's a key insight for us is that this didn't require us to then go off and create a whole bunch of new things. It was really leveraging a lot of the good stuff that we had already been developing over a period of time, but just keeping it more focused.
Yeah, absolutely. And if just kind of in closing, kind of here are some of the key things, and we've talked about these. It's just like, if you can think about ensuring you have that top-down support. So again, as Mazur talked about at Ortho, Martin, the CEO, was very direct on this, and his team, with Beatrice, the head of HR, and then, having Zach as the new customer success leader on the customer side. I mean, these were key signs in the business that this was important. And linking your efforts to the overall company goals and objectives. So as Mazur said, and I know I say this a lot as well, is that you're doing this ultimately for the financial results of the company, whether it's the customer or the employee, and it really should be both. But it's all with the lens on what are you trying to achieve. You're trying to grow your business, cross-sell your business, reduce churn. All of it is with that lens. And these things that are done are not just hot tub exercises. They should have a really clear linkage to what you're trying to achieve as a company. And that will get you more support and more sustainable support over time. And then I think that the third point here is, and again, Mazur and the team have done this because it was thought about through the whole process, is have a communication plan that really talks to, again, they talk to, over 100 people, employees in these focus groups. So the most important thing is to come back and say, here's what we heard, here's what we're doing, and make sure people understand that, there is something going to go forward with this. So I think that's really important, and that was really important to the Ortho team, is to make sure there was really clear communications, and also how to engage the direct leaders, how to talk to all employees about the initiative and the actions. And again, as Mazur said, many of these things were going on, but then it's your communication plan is about marketing these things and saying, here's what you told us, and here's what we have for you. And then lastly, and this really gets to kind of recognition in general, is really talk about the wins, because it can feel sometimes that, again, people know that there's different systems being implemented or different programs that maybe seem more long-term, but there are always, small, impactful items that happen sooner that you can be talking about, and really from whether it's a market, so like in China, we just did this, and here we've just seen this, and, giving people recognition so it doesn't feel like it's just an HR initiative, but it's everyone being part of this and driving these improvements. So, those are some of the key takeaways. I guess, Mazur, anything else you would add as important to kind of as a big takeaway from this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the byproduct or sort of a peripheral benefit, I think partly because we decided to move really fast. Well, to me, it's all about the team, right? Like this could not have happened if number one, we didn't have, a great leader in Beatrice and a great HR leadership team, right? Bon Lopez, Tanuja Yalamanchili, Gary Passman, Nancy Panetta, Michelle Hines, Sandy MacArthur, right? We all felt that this was important. And I think we understood that not any one of us could do it on our own, right? So it was really a team effort. When we especially went into those focus groups, we knew we had 6 weeks to get it done. Everybody stepped up, right? And we had great partnership with communications. Christy Boreal and Donna Cardone and their team was terrific, right? So there's so many people that stepped up to help us do this. I wish I could list out all the names, but it really, when you're looking at galvanizing a function to get this insight, it really requires everybody to step into it. And so that's one thing I'm really proud of, and I think it brought us together as a team because, again, like this is something that we jointly felt was really critical for moving the organization forward.
Great. Awesome.
Thanks, Mazar. I just want to also remind everybody they can submit any questions that they have. We have a couple of questions for you, Mazar, but if you're listening, just go to your questions panel on the control panel and submit your question right now. We have just a few more minutes to get those last ones in. So, Mazar, what is any of the pitfalls that you think people might want to avoid in doing this whole process?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it is don't over-engineer it, right? I think in some ways it helped that we put ourselves on a really tight timeline, because I think the pitfall that I could see us running into is analysis paralysis, right? Because there's so much information that comes through this process, right? And I think it really does require discipline. It requires a focus to say, here's what we think, here's our hypothesis of what we think are the big areas, let's get all this data, let's synthesize it, and let's move, right? I think the pitfall could be, and I think we avoided this pitfall, but there were times when it felt like we were, especially in some of those large group meetings that Carrie, I know you and your team were there, like we were, and this is natural, right? Like this is how people have to process the information. It's like, well, what about this? If we could do that, or this is important, that's important, right? Everything starts to feel really important, and it just gets back to saying, what are the 2 or 3 things that you can do something about, right? Let's move the needle in the first year. Let's go. Let's get action going. It will, in and of itself, create energy, and the next year you can assess, how did you do? There's going to be other things that come up, right? So you're never done, right? But I think when you're getting something like this going and off the ground, you want to make sure you're not getting stuck in all of the analysis and all the details that come your way.
Excellent. Cool, thanks. And then this last question is basically, I think, asking, did you have any aha moments or surprising outcomes?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if they were aha moments, but I think I mentioned it earlier, right? I mean, for me, my big question personally was, I was really curious how someone's experience in Japan or China compared to someone's experience in Brazil, right? Or Dubai, right? So, I'm fascinated by cultures. I'm fascinated by the global nature of the world and of the work world in particular. And so the thing it was really an aha moment was, not surprisingly, right? People are people, regardless of your culture or your language. And I think the same thing kind of showed up in the feedback, right? People in organizations are looking for the same stuff, right? They're looking for great leaders. They're looking for the organization that cares about their development, about their growth, right? They care about knowing how they're doing, right? The whole feedback and appreciation. They want to be appreciated. People all over the world genuinely want to do meaningful work, and they want to be validated, and they want to be appreciated, and that they know that it's connecting to something that's bigger than themselves. I think that is a human, quality. And I think at Ortho, we have a purpose that is about saving lives through diagnostics. So when I talk to people around the world, and I talk to my friends, I say, look, one of the reasons I joined Ortho was, it's great that people work at Google and other places, and I think these are wonderful companies, but how many companies can say that they are actually creating products and services that help directly save people's lives, right? And that's really huge, and I think that that purpose really kind of is the underpinning of all of this work, right? If we believe that that purpose is really what it's all about, and we have to provide our customers with the equipment, the tests, the insights, so that they can ultimately help save people's lives, right? We've got to do everything we can to get our customer experience the best it can be, our employee experience the best it can be. So, again, to answer your question, I think it was that sort of consistent global human need that a lot of the employees shared as we went through this process.
So great. Such a great way to end this. And we definitely appreciate all your insights, Mazur. And thanks for the great conversation between you two, you and Carrie. And everyone, I think that's all the questions we had. So thank you very much for joining. We'll be sending out a link to the recording of the webinar today in just a couple days. If you have any additional questions about the webinar today, or if you'd like to speak to one of our CX practitioners about your company's customer experience or journey mapping projects, just go ahead and email me at the address on the screen, and I'll get back to you immediately. So thank you, everybody,
Anthony,
for attending.
If I could just say one last, and I know I'm probably going to embarrass Carrie because she would be embarrassed that I would say this, but in all honesty, Carrie and her team were unbelievable, like really incredible to help guide us through this process, right? As you can see, conceptually it's pretty straightforward, but actually rolling this out and implementing it and having the framework and having the expertise to guide you along the way, right? There's no way we could have gotten to where we were if it wasn't for Carrie and the Customers First Now team, right? So I just want to thank you guys. You guys have been instrumental in helping us and just been a terrific partner in this journey.
Thank you, Mazur. That is very nice. But I will say it is, as we've said earlier, I mean, you've heard from Mazur, it is such a collaborative effort, and that's what makes it a success. But yes, we love doing this type of work, and I think, as Anthony said, anyone wanting to discuss, employee maps, customer maps, and just approaches, we're always here for you. So, Mazur, again, yes, thank you so much for being with us today, and everyone else on the line, I really appreciate it. Anthony, anything else?
No, that's all.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.